Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista here, and today I wanted to make one die look a little bit differently by using it 5 different ways. Yes, I'll be using a rectangle die as well as some sentiment dies, but my focus is using one die 5 different ways. The first way I'll utilize this die is to create a template to adhere the elements to the front of the card. I'll start off today by die cutting a rectangle that's 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches into white 110-pound cardstock. To do this, I'm using the largest rectangle in Simon Says Stamp Basic Rectangle Wafer Die Set. Into a piece of scrap paper that has a straight edge, I'll die cut Simon Says Stamp Cupid's Heart Border Die, making sure that that is also straight. To make sure that my rectangle doesn't move, I'll tape that down to my glass mat, and I'm using the lines on my glass mat to make sure that my rectangle is straight. Before I tape my scrap piece of paper to my rectangle, I want to make sure that all of the little elements are punched out, but also that I keep them, so I'll punch them out into a bowl to use them later. Once I've collected all of those elements, I'll go ahead and tape my scrap piece of paper with my border die over my rectangle. I want to make sure that my border die is as straight as possible. The first border is a little bit tricky because I've punched out all of the little elements and I need to find in which space they go. Using liquid adhesive, I'll adhere the elements that were punched out from the border die, using the scrap piece of paper as a guide to get perfect alignment. I chose to glue down all of the hearts as well as the leaves. I chose not to include the circles in this particular card. For all of the ways that I use this border die, the design doesn't have to be at the bottom of the card. It's what I prefer. You can just as easily choose to put the design in the middle or closer to the top. That's completely personal preference. Since I didn't include the circle die cuts, I chose to use some Perfect Pearl in its place, starting off with Perfect Pearl in Perfect Gold. I added the Perfect Pearl to the card front using a little bit of water mixed with a little bit of the Perfect Pearl. I chose to color the circles in both Perfect Gold and Confetti White. I chose to color the hearts and the leaves in markers. These are alcohol-based markers in the brand called Oahu. As I colored, I made sure to keep the markers in order as I will be adding additional layers to the front of the card. Once the first layer was completed, I removed the template. There were some leaves and some hearts that came off a little bit, but that was okay. I simply pushed them through with my paper piercer or added an additional layer if necessary. I then die cut a second and third layer. The second and third layers are easier because the die cuts remain on the cutting plates in line where they're meant to be, or stay within the die, making it easier to find their place on the border. Once the second layer was complete, I went ahead and colored the die cuts again. And I chose to color the die cuts between each layer so that I wouldn't have the white showing on each side. I do also like how I can see a little bit of color underneath the white. I did, however, find that it was a little bit too subtle for this card front. Once the third and final layer of die cuts were added, I chose to add a die cut sentiment. The sentiment that I chose to die cut today was "Thank You" in Lawn Fawn's Thank You Border Die. All the sentiments today are die cut from gold foil cardstock and adhered with liquid adhesive. And finally, the card front was added onto an A2 card base using liquid adhesive. The second way I'll utilize this die is to create not only a window, but also a template to adhere the elements to the inside of my card. For the second card, I chose to die cut the Simon Says stamp Cupid's Heart border die into the front of a note card. It's important for the second method to run your note card through your die cut machine with the card open, because you only want the front of the card to be die cut. Once the note card was run through the die cut machine, I carefully removed the die. This time, a lot of the die cut pieces remained within the note card or remained within the die. For this method, the die cuts were adhered to the inside of the note card. So you'll see the hearts when the heart is closed, but also when they're open. I was lucky that some of the pieces remained within the border. And without moving them, I added liquid adhesive to the inside of the note card, closed the card, and pushed the pieces to the inside with a paper piercer before opening the note card. I then plucked the remaining die cuts out of the die and adhered them with liquid adhesive, again pushing them through the front of the card. I chose to color the die cuts with the same colors of alcohol markers as the first card before adding my die cut sentiment to the outside of the card. For this card, I chose Hello Border Die from Lawn Fawn, again in gold foil cardstock. What I like about using one die in many ways is they make a great set to gift. The third way I'll be using this die is as a stencil. Again, I'll start with a 5.5 by 4.25 rectangle. This time I'll utilize one of the stencils that was created from the first method. I again didn't want my card front to move, so I taped it to my glass mat using washi tape before lining up my stencil and taping that down as well. I chose today to use Perfect Pearls to color in my stencil, mixing each of the colors with a little bit of water before painting it into the stencil. The first color I chose is Forever Blue, followed by Grape Fizz, Forever Violet, Forever Green, Forever Red, Gumball, Blue Hydrangea, Zinnia, Iris, and Heirloom Gold. For the circles, I chose Perfect Gold. Finally, for the leaves, I chose Mint. I then removed my stencil and dried my card front with a heat tool. Since I used Perfect Pearl and there was a bit of running, I chose to add a cover to what I created. This step wouldn't be necessary if you chose to color in your stencil with an alcohol marker or an ink. To create the cover for the Perfect Pearl, I die cut the Cupid's heart border into a 5.5 by 4.25 inch rectangle. The cover was adhered to the cardstock with Perfect Pearl using liquid adhesive. I like liquid adhesive for making covers for Perfect Pearl because there's a little bit of wiggle room to make sure they're lined up perfectly before pressing down. To finish this card, I die cut Thank You from gold foil cardstock and adhered that with liquid adhesive. The fourth way to utilize this die is to create a shaker card. I started by die cutting the heart border into a 5.5 by 4.25 inch piece of cardstock. The window for my shaker card was created using a piece of acetate. I eyeballed how high the acetate needed to be, and for the width, I certainly could have measured 5.5 inches, as 5.5 inches is the width of the card front. I chose to line up the acetate with the right-hand side of the card front and mark with an alcohol-based marker where the edge of the card was. I then trimmed that down with my paper trimmer. Once the acetate was trimmed to size, I adhered that to my card front using liquid adhesive. A permanent tape runner also works well in this situation. I knew that I wanted pearlescent vellum to be the backer for my shaker card, and since pearlescent vellum is fairly see-through, I just laid it over my card front and marked with a marker how high I needed to trim it with my paper trimmer and how wide I needed to trim it as well. To tie in the shaker element to the sentiment that I'll be die cutting from gold foil cardstock, I chose to die cut some hearts using Hero Art's Fancy Die Heart Confetti die. Since I didn't need a large number of heart confetti, nor did I want to store a lot of extra heart confetti, I chose just to die cut a small scrap piece of gold foil cardstock. As I place my hearts into my shaker, I want to make sure that the gold foil portion is facing down. It's touching the acetate so that the gold foil shows through my card front once the shaker is closed. Along with the heart confetti, I added a couple different glitters from Recollections. I chose to close my shaker with some liquid adhesive. The goal was to add liquid adhesive all around the border in a continuous line to ensure that none of the confetti fell out. I did, however, miss a little portion, and I did have an opening for glitter and confetti to fall through. To fix this, I glued a little strip of pearlescent vellum to the back of the shaker. Since this will be added to a card front, no one will even know that it's there. For the sentiment, I used Lawn Fawn's Hello border die cut from gold foil cardstock. To complete this card, I added the card front to an A2 card base using liquid adhesive. Using liquid adhesive on this card front with vellum, I wanted to make sure not to get any liquid adhesive on the vellum portion, just because liquid adhesive on vellum tends to show through. It wrinkles a little bit, and I didn't want that to tarnish all the hard work that I'd put into this card. I was able to put liquid adhesive along the bottom seam and the top of the card, and the card adhered nicely. The fifth and final way to utilize this die is to create an overlay on your card front. As before, I die cut a 5.5 by 4.25 inch rectangle and die cut the Simon Says stamp Cupid Hearts border die into the card front. Using an alcohol marker, I then marked off how wide and how tall to cut my gold foil cardstock. I made sure to mark it on the back. The gold foil cardstock was then adhered to the 110-pound white cardstock rectangle using Tombow permanent tape runner, making sure that the foil side was touching the cardstock. The sentiment was then cut from gold foil cardstock as well, using Lawn Fawn's Thank You border die. The card front was then adhered to an A2 card base using liquid adhesive. And there you have 5 ways to utilize one die to create variation in your cards. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.